The sound reached him before anything else. A low, rhythmic creak, rope pulled taut against rusted iron, rising above the drumming of the Inchin rain. Seo-jun Lee's hand moved to his gun before his mind caught up. He'd walked these docks 100 times. He knew every sound that belonged here, the groan of cargo containers settling, the slap of black water against pylons, the distant bark of men who worked in the dark for men like him. This sound did not belong. He followed it. And there she was. Anchored to the iron gate like something left behind, like cargo, her arm twisted upward, wrist bound with rope that had already cut deep enough to bleed. Rain ran in red rivulets down her dark skin, pooling at her feet, and still she stood. Still she held weight on her legs, still her eyes, when they found his, did not beg. They only watched, measuring, is this man the next thing that hurts me or not? Seo-jun had stood in rooms where men twice his size wept. He had not looked away then. He looked away now. "Who did this to you?" he said, voice flat, controlled, the voice he used when he needed to feel nothing. Her answer came quiet, exhausted, like a fact she had long since made peace with. "My stepfather." A pause, the rope creaked. "He does it 4 times a week." The safety on his gun clicked off. "Before we go any further, drop in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I love seeing where you all come from. And if this story is already pulling you in, please subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it tells me you want more stories like this one." The warehouse smelled like salt water and machine oil, and something older beneath both. The particular rot of a building that had held too many secrets for too long. Seo-jun stood outside in the rain, cigarette burning down to nothing between his fingers, while his men swept the dock behind him. 2 minutes. Clean. The only evidence left was the severed rope still dangling from the gate. And the woman sitting in the back seat of his car. Min-yi appeared at his shoulder, silent as punctuation. "The men are ready. What do we do with her?" "She comes with us." Min-yi's silence stretched 1 second too long. Seo-jun didn't repeat himself. 30 minutes east, buried in a district where nobody asked questions, his phone rang for the 3rd time. He answered. "Seo-jun." Commissioner David Miller's voice was smooth, comfortable, the voice of a man who had never once feared consequences. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. $80 million a year, 3 shipping contracts, the arrangement that had built the last 7 years of Seo-jun's empire, all of it sat behind that voice. Miller was the network. The network was everything. "I don't know what you mean," Seo-jun said. Miller laughed softly. "Of course, we'll speak soon." The line went dead. In the rearview mirror, Zara's eyes were already on him. She had heard everything. He hadn't tried to hide it. He took the stairs to the safe house alone and stood in the stairwell, hand flat against the cold concrete, and forced himself to be honest. He could return her. 1 call, 2 words. The network holds, the contracts renew, and the whole thing disappears before morning. He thought about the rope, about the particular exhausted calm in her voice when she'd said 4 times a week, not the calm of someone who was fine, but of someone who had run out of energy to sound broken. He climbed the stairs. She was sitting upright on the cot when he entered, jacket folded neatly beside her despite everything she'd been through. She looked at him without flinching. "You haven't given me back yet," she said quietly. "Why?" He didn't answer. Honesty was a currency he spent carefully. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow gets complicated." He left, and in the hallway, he accepted what he'd already decided on the docks. He wasn't giving her back, which meant he had just declared war on the most powerful man in Inchin. He checked his gun. Fine. The call came at 3 a.m. 4 vehicles, moving fast from the port road. They're not police, no markings, no lights. Min-yi's voice was flat and precise. Cleaners. Seo-jun was already on his feet. He moved through the safe house without turning on a single light, navigating by memory and the pale bleed of neon through the curtains. He pushed open Zara's door. She was awake, sitting upright in the dark like she had never really slept at all, like some part of her had stayed on watch even through exhaustion. "We're moving," he said. She didn't ask why. She stood, slid her feet into her shoes, and followed. He noted that, filed it away. The back stairwell was narrow and smelled like mildew and old cooking. Seo-jun went first, one hand back to guide her pace without touching her, close enough that she could feel the signal. Fast, quiet. Now, she matched him step for step. Minyi had the car running in the alley below, headlights off. Two other men flanked the exit, faces unreadable, hands loose at their sides in the particular way of people who were ready. They were 3 blocks east when the first vehicle rounded the corner behind them. A black SUV, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of people who expected to find what they were looking for. "Don't look back," Seo-jun said. Zara looked forward. Good. Minyi cut through the market district, threading the car through streets too narrow and too crooked for the SUVs to follow cleanly. The city slid past the windows in rivers of pink and gold light, Pajing matcha carts still steaming at the roadside, a bar spilling noise and warmth onto the pavement, a woman walking a small dog who did not look up as they passed. Incheon at 3 a.m. had its own rules. Seo-jun had written most of them. By the time they crossed into the northern quarter, the mirrors were clean. Zara exhaled slowly beside him, not relief, exactly. More like a person releasing a breath they had been holding for years and weren't yet sure they were allowed to stop holding. He didn't comment on it, but he noticed. The second safe house was quieter, smaller. A third-floor apartment above a dry-cleaning shop, warm and faintly chemical-smelling, with a single window that looked out over a street so ordinary it felt like a disguise. A woman named Hana, compact, efficient, the kind of person who asked nothing and noticed everything, was already waiting with a medical kit open on the table. Zara sat in the chair without being asked and extended her wrist. The rope had cut deeper than Seo-jun had allowed himself to fully register at the docks. In the lamplight, it looked worse. Hana worked in silence, cleaning and dressing with practiced hands, and Zara watched the window the entire time with the focused stillness of someone who had learned to leave their body during pain. Seo-jun stood near the door, arms crossed, watching. "He has 3 people inside the department," Zara said quietly, without preamble, as though she had been organizing the information in her head since the docks and had simply been waiting for a room safe enough to release it. 2 detectives and someone in records. Anything filed against him disappears within 24 hours. I know because I tried. A pause. Twice. Hana wrapped the bandage without reacting. Seo-jun said nothing. "The schedule started 8 months ago," Zara continued, her voice the same level, stripped of drama, the way people speak about things they have had to survive by not feeling. "Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday if he felt the week had been," she stopped, chose the word carefully, "unsatisfactory." The room was very quiet. "He's careful," she said. "He never leaves marks where they show. He's been doing this a long time and he knows exactly where the lines are." She finally looked at Seo-jun directly. "Which means he's done it before me." Seo-jun held her gaze, said nothing, but something behind his eyes shifted, a door closing over something too old and too close to stay open in front of her. Hana finished. Zara looked down at the clean white bandage and touched the edge of it lightly, like she was surprised by it. Like she hadn't expected anyone to bother. "Hey, are you enjoying the story so far? If Zara and Seo-jun have you hooked, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you want to see how this plays out, like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. It genuinely helps the channel grow." The meeting was Miller's idea. Neutral ground, he'd said, which meant a restaurant he owned through a company that didn't exist, in a neighborhood where every third person on the payroll answered to him. Seo-jun came alone. That was intentional. Bringing men would signal anxiety. He had none to show. Miller was already seated when he arrived, working through a glass of something amber and expensive, suit immaculate, silver hair catching the low light like a man who had been carefully lit his entire life. He looked like a commissioner. He looked like someone's respectable father. That was the most dangerous thing about him. He smiled when Seo-jun sat down. "I'll skip the pleasantries," Miller said, sliding a folder across the table. "I think that's best for both of us." Seo-jun didn't open it. "Busan Port," Miller said. Full clearance, customs exemptions across 4 terminals, projected volume, he tapped the folder, is roughly 3 times your current operation, per year. The number underneath that implication was obscene. Seo-jun could see it without opening the folder because he knew exactly what 3 times his current operation meant. It meant untouchable. It meant generational. It meant the kind of infrastructure that outlived the men who built it. Miller let the silence do the work. He was good at that. All I want, Miller said, voice dropping just slightly, not threatening, almost gentle, which was worse, is for you to return what you found. She's not your concern, Seo-jun. She's a personal matter, a family matter. He picked up his glass. You of all people understand discretion. Seo-jun looked at him for a long moment. At the careful eyes behind the easy smile. At the hands that had built a schedule Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, and called it a family matter. He picked up the folder. Opened it. Looked at the numbers. Closed it. Slid it back across the table. I found nothing at the docks, Seo-jun said. There's nothing to return. Miller's smile stayed in place, but something behind it went very cold. Think carefully, he said quietly. I have, Seo-jun said and stood. He buttoned his jacket, left the folder on the table. Walked out into the night without looking back. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the window of the safe house, jacket off, gun on the table beside a cold cup of tea, and let the memory come the way he usually didn't allow it to, all the way in, without the door. He was 9 years old, the first time he understood what the sounds meant. Their apartment in Bupyeong had walls thin as paper, and his mother had learned to be quiet so the neighbors wouldn't hear, and he had learned to be quiet so she wouldn't know that he did. He would lie in the dark of his small room counting the water stains on the ceiling, 7 of them, shaped like countries he hadn't studied yet, and wait for the sounds to stop. She always looked the same the morning after. Hair neat, clothes pressed, breakfast on the table before he was fully awake. She would smile at him across the rice and the soup, and he would smile back, and they would both pretend with everything they had. She was so good at it. That was the thing that had stayed with him longer than the sounds, longer than the bruises he wasn't supposed to see, her absolute, exhausting commitment to pretending. As though if she performed normalcy with enough precision, it would eventually become true. It never became true. She died when he was 15. A Tuesday. The official report said cardiac event, which was the kind of language that covered a great many things if nobody looked too closely, and nobody did, because his father was by then a man with enough reach to ensure nobody looked too closely at anything. Seo-jun had looked. He had been looking ever since. He understood now why Zara's voice had stopped him at the docks, not the fear in it, but the absence of fear. That specific exhausted flatness of a person who had been performing normalcy for so long that the performance had become its own kind of silence. He had grown up inside that silence. He knew exactly what it cost. He picked up his gun, set it down again, looked out at the city, quiet and glittering and indifferent, and made himself a promise he intended to keep. Not this time. The dress was black, simple. Zara had looked at it for a long moment when Hana laid it on the bed, then looked at Seo-jun in the doorway with an expression that said she had several questions and had chosen, for now, to ask none of them. There's a gala tonight, he said. Miller will be there. Every journalist, city official, and business partner he owns will be in the same room. And you want to walk me into that room? I want him to see you standing. He held her gaze. Untouched, in public, in front of every person whose opinion he has spent 20 years carefully managing. She was quiet for a moment, then she picked up the dress. The event was held in a glass and steel tower overlooking Incheon Harbor, the kind of venue that existed to remind everyone inside it how far they had climbed. Chandeliers, champagne, men in suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, moving through the room with the practiced ease of people who had never once questioned whether they belonged. Seo-jun moved through them like he owned the floor, which in several practical senses he did. 3 of the catering staff were his. 2 of the security team at the east entrance answered to Min-yi. He had spent 20 years building rooms inside other people's rooms. Zara walked beside him, back straight, chin level, the same quiet composure she had worn in the safe house and the car and the stairwell, all the way through. She had learned, he was beginning to understand, to carry herself like armor. Like if she stood upright enough, nothing could find the cracks. He saw Miller the moment they entered. Miller saw them 3 seconds later. The champagne glass in the commissioner's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. Just for a moment, half a second, barely visible, his face did something it almost never did. It slipped. The composed, silver-haired, respected public servant looked across the gleaming room at the young woman he had kept on a schedule, standing alive and unhurt and present in a room full of witnesses. And for just that half second, he looked afraid. Zara felt it. Seo-jun watched her feel it, the small, quiet shift in her spine. She stood half an inch taller. Miller recovered fast, men like him always did, and within seconds the smile was back, the glass was moving again, and he was nodding attentively at whatever the city councilor beside him was saying. But the damage was done. 3 people nearby had caught the flicker. Seo-jun had made sure to position them in eyeline of the room's most observant guests. Seeds didn't need to be large. They only needed to land in the right soil. What happened next was Miller's mistake, and it was the mistake of a man who had operated without consequence for so long that he had forgotten consequences existed. He sent 2 of his private security, off-duty, plain-clothed, the kind of men who did the work that never appeared in any report, to intercept Seo-jun near the East Corridor as the evening wound down. Not to threaten, just to deliver a message the old-fashioned way, a hand on the arm, a quiet word, a reminder of who held the longer reach in this city. The first man was professional, the second was not careful enough. The knife was small, the movement fast, and the crowd noise covered everything. Seo-jun felt the burn below his ribs before he fully registered what had happened. A clean, shallow cut, the kind designed to sting rather than stop a man. A warning written in blood. He straightened his jacket, finished his champagne, walked back to Zara at the center of the room as though nothing had occurred, because the most dangerous thing he could do in that moment was let Miller see it land. "We're leaving," he said quietly beside her ear. She read his face in one glance and asked nothing. They walked out through the front entrance, unhurried, in full view of everyone, and it was only in the car, when the city lights were sliding past and Minyi had confirmed the mirrors were clean, that Seo-jun allowed his hand to press against his side. Zara saw it. She didn't look away. They got back to the safe house past midnight. The car ride had been silent, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that sits heavy with everything that almost happened and everything still coming. Zara had watched Seo-jun's hand pressed against his side the entire drive and said nothing, because she understood by now that he would not accept concern that looked like weakness on his behalf. She waited until they were inside. "Sit down," she said. He looked at her. "Sit down." He sat less because she asked, and more because the stairs had cost him more than he intended to show. Hana appeared briefly, left the medical kit on the table, and disappeared with the particular discretion of someone who knew when a room didn't need a third person. Zara pulled her chair close and opened the kit. "Shirt," she said. He unbuttoned it slowly, and she noticed, without comment, that his hands were steadier than most men's would be after a knife and 3 hours of performing indifference through a room full of enemies. The cut ran 4 inches along his lower ribs. Clean, deliberate. The kind that said I could have gone deeper and chose not to. She cleaned it without flinching, without the sharp intake of breath people sometimes gave when the damage was worse than expected. She had seen worse. He understood, without either of them saying it, that she had seen much worse. "He wanted you to feel it," she said quietly, pressing gauze to the wound. "Not to stop you, just to remind you he could." "I know." "Did it work?" "No." She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. She worked in silence after that, and he let her, and the small kitchen above the dry-cleaning shop was very still and very warm, and outside the window Inchin glittered on without them. This close he could see things the distance swallowed, the careful steadiness she wore like a second skin, the faint scar near her temple, the way her hands never once trembled even when her eyes gave away everything. When she finished, she didn't move immediately. Neither did he. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow," she agreed. But for one moment longer, neither of them moved toward it. The warrant arrived at the safe house at dawn. "Not delivered," announced. 3 police vehicles parked at both ends of the street, officers moving into position with the quiet efficiency of an operation that had been planned well in advance. Minnie's voice came through the phone flat and fast. 6 officers, 2 exits covered. Someone talked or someone tracked us. Either way, we have 4 minutes. Seo-jun was already pulling on his jacket. Zara stood in the kitchen doorway, still dressed, as though some part of her had never fully trusted the night to stay quiet. She read his face in one look and asked nothing. "Stay close," he said. "Don't stop for anything." They went through the building's maintenance corridor, a narrow, low-ceilinged passage that smelled like pipe rust and old wiring, running the length of the block behind the dry-cleaning shop. Minnie met them at the far end with 2 men, and a car parked in the service alley, engine already running. They were 1 block clear when the first shot came. Miller's private cleaners, not the officers, the other ones, the ones who didn't carry badges or file reports, had taken the rooftop of the building opposite. Seo-jun pulled Zara down as the rear window fractured, glass scattering across the back seat, and Minnie floored the accelerator without being told. The next 4 minutes were noise and motion, and the particular cold focus that Seo-jun's mind locked into when everything became simple. No contracts, no networks, no careful calculations of loyalty and leverage. Just the next street. The next turn. The next 30 seconds. His side screamed where the bandage pulled against torn skin. He ignored it. They lost the second car in the market district. The third stayed with them longer, a black SUV riding close. Trading paint with Minnie through 3 consecutive red lights, until Seo-jun made a single call and a lorry pulled out from a side street and ended the pursuit with a sound like a full stop. Silence. Zara straightened slowly in the seat beside him. Her breathing was controlled. Her hands were still. "He's burning everything," she said quietly. "He knows he's losing." "Yes," Seo-jun said. "That makes him more dangerous." "Yes," he said again. "It does." They found Miller at his private residence by 7 a.m. Not hiding. Men like Miller never hid, because hiding admitted fear and fear admitted guilt. And guilt was the one thing his entire architecture of power had been built to ensure nobody could ever formally attach to his name. He was sitting in his study when Seo-jun's men came through the door, still dressed from the night before, a glass of something amber at his elbow as though the world was not dismantling itself around him floor by floor. He looked at Seo-jun, then at Zara standing just behind him. Something moved across his face that he couldn't fully control, not remorse. Men like Miller didn't carry remorse, but the cold and specific recognition of a man who finally understood that the outcome he had spent 20 years ensuring was not, in fact, the outcome arriving. "This is illegal entry," Miller said. "Whatever you think you're doing." "The 3 detectives you own inside the department," Seo-jun said quietly, "gave statements this morning, separately. They each believe the others have already spoken, which means none of them are protecting anything anymore." He let that sit for a moment. "Your records man filed his own paperwork an hour ago, immunity in exchange for documentation going back 11 years. Miller's hand tightened around his glass. "The journalists Zara contacted twice, the ones whose stories disappeared before they could run, received their source material again this morning," Seo-jun continued. "All of it, dates, medical records she kept hidden, photographs she took herself and stored somewhere you never thought to look." He paused. "She's been building the case for 8 months. She just needed someone to make sure it reached the right hands without disappearing again." The glass came down on the desk, slowly, with great care, as though Miller was using the motion to hold himself together. Zara stepped forward. She stood in front of him and looked at him with clear, steady eyes and let him see that she was still here, still standing, unmarked by his schedule, unbroken by his careful cruelty, entirely and completely herself. She did not perform anger. She did not perform anything. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at something that used to have power over them and no longer does. "I stopped counting Sundays," she said quietly. "I want you to know that." Miller said nothing. For the first time in 20 years, he had nothing left to say. He was taken from the residence by 2 officers, real ones, from a unit that answered to nobody in Miller's pocket within the hour. No cameras, no press. That would come later, and it would be loud, and it would be thorough. But this moment was quiet. The contracts burned in the metal drum in the courtyard shortly after, all 3 of them, the Busan clearances, the Incheon exemptions, every signed and countersigned page of the arrangement that had purchased silence and called it legitimate business. Seo-jun stood and watched them go with his hands in his pockets and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 7 years. By 9 a.m., the city was fully awake around them, ordinary, bright, indifferent in the way that cities are indifferent, moving forward without waiting for anyone to finish what they needed to finish. Zara stepped outside and stopped on the pavement and turned her face up toward the morning sun with her eyes closed. Just for a moment, just long enough. Seo-jun stood beside her and said nothing, because nothing was exactly what the moment needed. She exhaled slowly, the deep, unhurried exhale of a person who had been holding their breath for 8 months and had finally, completely, been given permission to stop. She opened her eyes. "I don't know when I stopped counting," she said. "The days between. I just realized this morning I hadn't counted in a while." He knew when. He didn't say it. Instead, he stood beside her in the sunlight, on an ordinary street, in a city that was already moving on, and waited until she was ready to move with it. When she did, she walked forward with her shoulders back and her chin level, and her whole self present in a morning that belonged entirely to her. He walked beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. Power is neither good nor evil. It is only as worthy as what you choose to protect with it. Seo-jun Lee was a dangerous man. He operated outside the law, built his empire on silence and fear, and understood better than most how the world really worked beneath its respectable surface. By every conventional measure, he was the villain of any room he entered. But when it mattered, when a woman was anchored to a gate in the rain and the entire weight of the network said look away, he chose differently. And Commissioner Miller was the true lesson. He wore the right suit, carried the right title, attended the right galas, and shook the right hands. He was the law. He was respectability itself. And behind all of it, he was the most dangerous thing a person in power can become, someone who stopped believing consequences applied to him. The story tells us this. The measure of a person is not the power they hold, but what they do when using that power costs them something real. Zara survived not because the system protected her. The system was Miller. She survived because one man decided that $80 million and a clean empire were worth less than one woman's right to stop counting the days. And in making that choice, he became something he never expected. Human. Speech balloon before you go. If you made it all the way to the end of Zara and Seo-jun's story, you already know there is more to tell. Seo-jun burned the contracts, but empires don't collapse quietly. There are men who lost money the night Miller fell, men who had arrangements of their own, men who now have a reason to look in Seo-jun's direction. And Zara, who spent 8 months surviving, is only just learning what it means to live. Drop a comment right now and let me know, do you want a part 2? Because if the response is loud enough, it may be coming sooner than you think. Type part 2 in the comments if you're ready to go back to Incheon. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you're the first to know when it drops. Like this video so more people find this story. Share it with someone who loves a good redemption arc. This story was built for people who believe that even the most broken situations can find the most unexpected rescuers. Thank you for watching. See you in part 2.